Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on quite a mission, really, spanning millennia, pulling together some really foundational texts on human organization and power.
Yeah, it's a big one. We're looking at everything from the ancient Greek polis, Vedic spirituality, right up to modern military operations and corporate power struggles.
We've got a huge source stack.
Hmm.
We're talking Aristotle's Politics, the Bhagavad Gita, which is profound stuff, then Clausewitz, Sun Tzu.
And bring in more current lessons from Navy SEALs leadership, the guys on the ground, plus case studies like Pixar, IBM. It's a real mix.
So the mission for you listening is really to pull out the universal truths. What does it actually take to lead a complex system effectively? Whether that's a nation, an army, or just your team at work. How do you survive?
And we're looking at both sides of the coin, right? The external structures, laws, governance, but also that crucial internal game, consciousness, character, control.
Yeah, the inner stuff. And what's fascinating, I think, is how consistent some themes are, regardless of the era.
Absolutely. Something that jumps out immediately, whether you're reading Aristotle from 2,500 years ago or a corporate analysis from 10 years ago, is this focus on the fragility of it all. Stability is, well, it's not guaranteed.
Right. Power shifts.
Right.
Organizations, governments, businesses, they all need to actively work to survive, often in ways that might seem counterintuitive.
So let's start with that big picture. The external structure, the state itself, Aristotle's Politics. It's just a masterclass, isn't it, in pragmatic thinking about how to keep things stable.
Yeah, he wasn't dreaming up utopias. He was looking at real Greek city-states, constantly dealing with civil war, factionalism. He wanted to know what works, what lasts.
Exactly. What makes any state, whether it's an oligarchy, a democracy, whatever, actually survive for a long time. He makes this really key distinction between what the rulers think makes their state strong versus what actually helps it survive. And the virtues that truly work, he argues, are the ones that push towards moderation.
Okay, moderation. That sounds reasonable. But how does that play out practically? Say, if you're running an oligarchy, ruled by the rich.
Right. Your instinct, your sort of natural inclination would be to double down, right? Give all the power, all the offices to the wealthy. Reinforce your base.
Makes sense from their perspective.
But Aristotle says, hold on, that extreme approach, it's actually suicidal for the Constitution. He argues the system has to become more moderate, more inclusive, even if it's still fundamentally an oligarchy.
Inclusive how?
It needs to aim, at least partly for the common benefit, not just the ruler's benefit. The goal is stability, and you get that through buy-in. He actually says, let me find the reference. Yeah, 1309 I 1718. He says even the justice system in an oligarchy has to be careful.
Careful how?
To make sure that the number of people who want the Constitution to continue is stronger than the number of people who don't.
Wow. Okay, so that's pretty blunt. He's basically saying, don't be so greedy that the majority gets desperate enough to overthrow you?
Yeah.
Is that it?
That's pretty much it. It's pure pragmatism. Constant threat of violence, stasis, factional war. If your system only benefits a tiny elite, you're constantly suppressing the majority. That takes huge energy. It's inherently unstable.
So giving the poor just enough of a stake, just enough reason not to revolt, is actually the smarter, more stable path for the rulers themselves.
Precisely. Stability, for Aristotle, seems to be the ultimate political virtue, maybe even more important than sticking rigidly to your ideology if that ideology leads to collapse.
That's a powerful point about structure, but we do need to touch on a really problematic part of Aristotle's foundation here.
Yeah.
Something the source material rightly flags, this idea of animate property.
Yes, that's the deeply uncomfortable part. He includes in his model of the household the idea of natural slaves, people he claims inherently lack the capacity for deliberation and are supposedly better off being ruled.
And as the source says, that's just. It's fundamentally flawed, morally reprehensible. It's crucial to remember that while we can learn from the structural insights about moderation and stability,
we absolutely have to reject the rotten foundations, the completely unacceptable assumptions about human beings that sometimes underpin these ancient systems.
Exactly. Which actually leads us quite nicely to the Enlightenment, because thinkers then were grappling with precisely how to build governance on a foundation of law and popular will, not arbitrary power or prejudice.
Absolutely. You get people like Rousseau wrestling with this. He was, I think, genuinely terrified of what happens when a leader's personal ambition starts to overshadow the agreed-upon structure.
He talks about the prince's dominant will, right? The ruler's own agenda. When that becomes more active than the general will, the law, The common good, what happened?
The whole thing just dissolves, according to Rousseau. The body politic collapses. It's dramatic. You suddenly have two competing sovereigns, the rightful one, which is the law, and the actual one, which is the self-interested ruler.
And the minute the leader decides their personal preference, their ego, is more important than the rules everyone agreed on.
Poof! The social contract just evaporates. The whole basis for legitimate rule is gone.
And Locke, he offers the practical antidote to that, doesn't he? His emphasis on clear, established laws.
Yes, promulgated, standing laws. That's the bedrock. The supreme authority, the legislature, can't just rule by whim, by extemporary, arbitrary decrees. That's chaos.
Why was he so insistent on that? The standing laws, known judges.
Because, Locke argues, without that predictability, everyone's life, liberty, and property are basically insecure. You're back in that uncertain state of nature. Law, properly established and applied, is the external structure that protects you from the powerful individual's arbitrary decisions. Section 136, I think it is.
Okay, so we have the need for moderate structures, aiming for stability, and then the Enlightenment emphasis on codified law over personal will. But what's the biggest source of conflict those laws need to manage? Madison in the Federalist Papers was pretty clear on this.
Oh, absolutely. Madison looked at the causes of faction, of division, and conflict. He saw some of it rooted deep in human nature itself, different opinions, passions, ambitions.
Right.
He said the most common and most durable source of factions, unequal distribution of property. Simple as that.
Landed interests versus manufacturing interests, creditors versus debtors.
Yeah.
He saw that everywhere.
And he basically said the primary job of modern government, of legislation, is to regulate these competing economic interests. That's what politics is, in large part.
It does make you wonder, though, was his main goal just managing the conflict? Or was it also about, building a system designed to protect wealth accumulation itself?
That's a really interesting tension. And Emerson actually captured it brilliantly with an analogy.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Emerson pointed out that politics is trying to protect two main things, persons and property. Personal rights, he said, demand democracy based on numbers, one person, one vote. Makes sense.
Okay.
But property rights are inherently unequal. Some people own a lot, some own little or nothing. So how do you balance that?
How do you illustrate it?
He used the example of Laban, who owns flocks and herds, pays taxes to protect the frontier where his property is, versus Jacob, who owns nothing, pays no tax. Okay.
Emerson says they should have equal rights when it comes to electing the official who defends their persons, their safety. But when it comes to deciding how much money to spend on protecting property, Laban, the owner paying the tax, should have more say, or at least a better understanding.
Arguably, yes. Emerson suggests Laban, or Isaac in another version, should judge better on funding property protection because he has skin in the game, economically speaking. It highlights that really difficult balancing act the American Republic was trying to engineer.
How do you uphold the democratic ideal equal persons while also acknowledging and protecting unequal economic realities and contributions?
It's tough. The structure has to be carefully balanced, just like Aristotle knew, really, to manage that inherent self-interest, that economic factionalism that's just part of the human condition, it seems. If the structure fails to protect both persons and property adequately,
the whole system risks imploding. So the big takeaway from this external focus seems to be leadership requires subordinating your personal will to the common rules, the law. And that law needs to be cleverly designed to manage everyone's competing interests to keep the whole thing stable.
That sums it up pretty well. It's about the framework.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the external structure, moderation, laws, managing factions. But now let's completely pivot. What about the inside, the internal structure? What kind of character, what kind of consciousness do people need to operate within these systems, especially leaders?
Right. And this is where we take a pretty transcendental turn with the Bhagavad Gita. It offers a perspective that's radically different from, say, the Federalist Papers, which are mostly about managing material self-interest.
How so? What's the core idea?
The Gita starts with a really fundamental challenge to our usual way of thinking. It basically says consciousness is not just a product of material stuff, of physical association. The idea that consciousness just sort of emerges from brain chemistry. The Gita rejects that.
Whoa, okay. That's big. If consciousness isn't generated by the body or the brain, then what is it?
It's seen as the eternal self, the essential spark of life. But in our current state, that consciousness is Well, the term used is materially
And
contaminated.
contaminated.
Like pure light shining through colored glass. The light itself is pure, but the glass adds distortions, the colors of anger, greed, envy, lust. Those aren't the nature of the consciousness itself, but the result of its contact with material energy.
So the goal isn't to create consciousness, but to purify the existing consciousness.
Exactly, to scrape the metaphorical colored paint off the glass so the pure light can shine through.
Okay, I think I follow the metaphor. But how does an ancient text talking about purifying my soul actually help me lead my team meeting on Monday morning, dealing with deadlines, market pressures?
Yeah.
Isn't this a bit, abstract, too far removed?
Well, it sets the ultimate standard for leadership intention, I think. The Grita says perfection isn't about stopping activity. You don't just drop everything and run off to a cave. Perfection comes from purifying the intention behind your activity. And that purification happens through what's called bhakti, often translated as devotional service. You still act, but why you act changes completely.
Okay, explain that. Purifying the action, the intention. What does that look like practically?
It means acting. Okay, acting entirely for the satisfaction of the supreme whole. The source calls it Ijivara, rather than for your own personal gain, your own ego gratification, your own sense pleasure.
Why? What's the logic there?
Because, the Giddish explains, we are all inherently parts and parcels of that supreme whole. The analogy used is the hand serving the body. The hand doesn't act for itself, it acts for the whole organism. And in doing so, the hand itself is nourished and benefits.
Ah, okay. So serving the whole automatically benefits the part. It reframes duty completely. It's not just some obligation. It's the natural way to function, the only path to real alignment.
Precisely. Duty, performed with the right consciousness, becomes liberating, not burdensome. And this sets the absolute highest bar for leadership. The ideal leader, the sannyasi or the yogi described, might be doing ordinary things, but their actions are pure because they're free from the contamination of selfish motive, the drive for personal glory, wealth, power. They're aligned with the ultimate purpose of the whole system.
It's the profound internal standard. So the Gata gives us this, ultimate ideal state of purified consciousness. Now, how does modern psychology bridge the gap? Can we actually get there or closer to it? Daniel Goleman offers some hope, right?
Yes, Goleman's work on emotional intelligence is really important here. He makes a key distinction between temperament, or sort of innate predisposition.
Like being naturally anxious or quick to anger, maybe.
Exactly. That might be the genetic hand you're dealt. But Goleman insists, and this is crucial, that biology is not destiny when it comes to emotions. Your temperament doesn't fix your emotional future.
So you're not stuck.
Not at all. Emotional learning is lifelong. He argues that even really deep habits, patterns learned in childhood, those automatic emotional responses, they can be reshaped. We can learn new ways of feeling and reacting.
So you can actually learn to become more patient, more empathetic, more effective emotionally, even if your starting point wasn't great. That's fundamentally optimistic, isn't it?
Hugely optimistic. It affirms our capacity for change, for, you might say, character purification throughout our lives.
And that potential for change, that ability to work on ourselves, is really the engine behind Stephen Covey's framework too, isn't it? His maturity continuum.
Yes, moving from dependence to independence and ultimately to interdependence. And the core mechanism he gives for achieving that kind of internal control and effectiveness is focusing on your circle of influence.
Explain that. Circle of concern versus circle of influence.
Okay, so the circle of concern is everything you worry about: the economy, politics, what other people think, the weather, loads of stuff. The circle of influence is much smaller. It's the things you can actually do something about.
And proactive people.
Proactive people focus their energy almost exclusively on their circle of influence. Reactive people spend all their time worrying and complaining about things in their circle of concern that they can't actually change. It's about where you direct your energy.
That seems like such a powerful diagnostic tool for anyone, especially a leader. Just asking, is this something I can actually influence, or am I just worrying about it?
Exactly. And Covey breaks down the problems within your circle of influence into different types, which is really helpful.
Right. What are they?
You've got direct control problems. These relate to your own behavior. They're solved by working on your habits. You need the knowledge of what to do, the skill to do it, and the desire or motivation. Like if you're always late, that's a direct control issue.
Yeah. What's next?
Indirect control problems. These involve other people's behavior. And the key here is you can't just fix the other person. You solve these by changing your methods of influence, how you communicate, how you persuade, how you interact. That's a huge part of leadership.
So you change your approach, not try to force them to change. Makes sense. And the last one.
Control problems. Things you genuinely can't influence, like past mistakes or, the weather. For these, the only proactive approach is acceptance. Learn from the past, adapt to the reality. Just recognizing which category a problem falls into saves so much wasted effort and frustration.
And the foundation for building this kind of self-mastery, this ability to focus your influence, Covey says it starts small, right? With commitment.
Yes. Making and keeping promises, even small ones, especially to yourself. That builds what he calls inner integrity. Every time you follow through, you build trust in yourself. Every time you break a promise, you diminish it.
Until, ideally, your sense of honor, your commitment becomes stronger than your moods or impulses.
Exactly. That internal consistency, that integrity, is what gives you the foundation to lead others effectively and consistently. You can't lead others if you can't lead yourself.
That idea of internal integrity, internal strength.
Yeah.
It sounds almost like a luxury until you face situations designed to strip away everything external. Which brings us, inevitably, to Viktor Frankl.
Yes. Frankl's insights from his experiences in Nazi concentration camps. They're about as profound as it gets on human character and internal freedom.
What was his core observation?
He said the absolute essential fight, the psychological battle for survival, was the fight against losing the feeling of being a unique individual, a person with inner value.
What happens when you lose that fight?
You start to see yourself as just part of the anonymous mass, a number, interchangeable, expendable. You degrade yourself, Frankl says, sinking to the level of just reacting like an animal. Preserving that inner self, that sense of uniqueness and dignity, was crucial.
And that inner core, that choice of attitude, that was one thing nobody could take away, wasn't it? Even in those horrific circumstances.
That's the ultimate freedom, Frankl identifies. The freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. And he connects this, interestingly, to finding meaning, even spiritual meaning. The wise person, he suggests, finds peace and maintains their dignity by understanding their connection to something larger, a supreme personality or paramatma that maintains them, recognizing their inherent worth regardless of external conditions.
It's the ultimate internal defense mechanism.
Wow. So whether you look at the Gita urging purified intention, Goleman showing we can reshape our emotional habits, Covey giving us practical tools like the circle of influence, or Frankl demonstrating the power of inner freedom under extreme duress.
The message is clear, that internal work, cultivating character, consciousness, and control is absolutely fundamental. It's the prerequisite for any kind of effective, sustainable leadership in the external world.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've built this picture of internal preparation, purified intention, emotional mastery, focus, inner integrity. Now, how does this translate when you're thrown into the messy, high-stakes reality of leading actual teams? It feels like a huge leap from, say, a meditating yogi to a commander under fire.
It is a leap, but the principles connect. And a great place to see this in action is the modern military, especially the kind of paradigm shift we saw with units like Task Unit Bruiser during the Battle of Ramadi. Jocko Willink's experiences there are really instructive.
What was the core lesson from Ramadi? It was incredibly complex, right?
Exactly. Highly dynamic, chaotic environment, targets moving, imperfect intelligence. The old, rigid, hierarchical command structure just wasn't working well enough. It was too slow, too brittle.
So what was the shift?
The shift was towards valuing resilience over robustness. That's a key distinction.
Okay, break that down for us. Resilience versus robustness. What's the difference in practice, say, in a military unit or even a company?
Sure. Robustness is trying to build something incredibly strong, like a fortress, or a perfectly engineered plan, designed to withstand a known kind of pressure or attack. Think detailed procedures, rigid hierarchies. The problem is, if the pressure changes, if the attack comes from an unexpected direction.
The robust system breaks. Catastrophically, maybe.
Often, yes, because it wasn't designed for that. Resilience, on the other hand, is different. It's the ability of a system, a team, an organization to absorb unexpected disturbances, to get hit, adapt, maybe even reconfigure itself, but still retain its basic function and keep pursuing its core mission.
So resilience is more about adaptability, flexibility, maybe even accepting a degree of vulnerability.
Exactly. It embraces the uncertainty. And how did Willink and his team cultivate that resilience in Ramadi? The key was decentralized command.
Pushing decisions down.
Way down. They realized the commander couldn't possibly make every tactical decision in time. It was just too slow. So success depended on empowering the subordinate leaders, the guys on the front line, to make critical decisions in real time based on the situation they were seeing.
But wait, doesn't that risk total chaos? If everyone's making their own calls, how do you keep everyone moving in the same direction? Don't you just get fragmentation?
That's the critical question, and the answer lies in the human element, the trust network. This is where the intense SEAL training, Booty-S, comes in. Its main purpose, arguably, isn't just creating individual super soldiers.
It's creating super teams.
Exactly. Super teams built on incredibly strong, trusting, horizontal relationships. They compensate for the lack of constant vertical orders with what they call shared consciousness. Everyone needs to understand the overall mission, the commander's intent, and critically, they need to trust each other implicitly.
Which leads to that famous, almost legendary guidance they used.
Yeah. Share information until you're afraid it's illegal.
I mean, that just cuts through so much corporate bureaucracy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The silo mentality.
It completely demolishes it. It's a recognition that in complex, fast-moving situations, the risk usually isn't in oversharing information. It's in leaders hoarding it or hierarchies slowing down the flow of critical intelligence. Horizontal trust and information flow become paramount.
Okay, let's take that idea of shared consciousness, trust, maybe even that radical information sharing, and see how it applies in a totally different complex environment. Corporate creative culture. Pixar comes to mind, with Ed Catmull.
Pixar is a fascinating case. Catmull learned some hard lessons, especially during the rescue of Toy Story 2. And his fundamental takeaway was profound.
Which was?
Get the people right first. The team, the chemistry, the trust. That's more important than having the perfect initial idea.
Really? More important than the idea itself?
Yes. His logic was, if you give a mediocre idea to a brilliant, cohesive team, they'll either fix it or, more likely, they'll recognize it's mediocre, throw it away, and come up with something much better together. But if you give a brilliant idea to a dysfunctional team...
They'll probably screw it up.
Exactly. So focus on building the right team environment first.
That really challenges the lone genius's model of leadership, doesn't it?
I know.
It suggests the leader's job is less about having all the answers and more about creating the conditions for the team to find them.
Precisely. But creating those conditions, well, that requires what Catmull calls a crucible of candor. And that is really, really hard to build, especially if you're starting from a place of fear.
He talks about their experience trying to bring Pixar's culture to Disney animation after the acquisition, right?
Yeah.
And finding it difficult.
Extremely difficult. They found a culture at Disney that was, frankly, based on fear. People were afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge ideas, especially if they came from someone higher up.
There's that heartbreaking anecdote. A Disney director describing the team's mindset. What was it?
He said it was like being a dog that had been beaten again and again. People would give superficial, safe comments in feedback meetings because they were terrified of saying something critical, terrified of being seen as negative, or worse, attacking someone personally.
And that fear just paralyzes creativity, doesn't it?
Completely. So Pixar had to explicitly teach and model this idea of radical candor, which is built on a simple but crucial distinction.
Attack the project, not the person.
Yes. You must be willing to rigorously critique the work, the idea, the project itself. That's essential for making it better. But you do it respectfully without making it personal. The leader's job is to create the psychological safety where people feel they can attack the project without fear of reprisal.
But, okay, being radically candid all the time, that sounds exhausting. And maybe counterproductive. You can't challenge every little thing.
No, you absolutely can't. And the source material actually gives a really practical rule of thumb for this, which I love.
What is it?
Leave 3 unimportant things unsaid each day.
Huh. Okay, that's useful. Pick your battles.
Right. Challenging people directly, even constructively, takes energy, yours and theirs. So reserve that energy, that candor, for the things that genuinely matter to the success of the project. Don't sweat the small stuff constantly.
And this candor, it needs to flow in all directions, doesn't it? Not just top down.
Critically important. It has to be practiced up, down, and sideways. Subordinates need to feel safe challenging bosses. Peers need to challenge peers constructively. And leaders absolutely have to actively solicit and welcome candid feedback from everyone. Without that multi-directional flow, it doesn't really work.
So the SEALs and Pixar both point towards decentralized trust, shared understanding, radical candor, pushing power and information out. But history is also full of examples of brilliant leaders who struggled, maybe failed, precisely because they couldn't let go of centralized control.
Oh, absolutely. And Robert Moses, the legendary controversial builder of modern New York City, is perhaps the ultimate case study here.
His achievements were just staggering, weren't they? Parks, parkways, bridges.
Yeah.
The scale is almost unbelievable.
Undeniable scale. 40,000 acres of parks, over 100 miles of parkways. He got things done. But his methods were famously autocratic. Steam shovel government, they called it.
He just rolled over opposition. Didn't care much for democratic process.
He often dismissed local officials, public feedback, saw it as just cheap politics getting in the way of progress. He built immense trust with bondholders because he always delivered, but the power became incredibly centralized in him.
And the problem arose
When his empire grew too vast, even for him to manage personally, he had to start delegating smaller park projects to subordinates. And what happened?
the quality dropped. They became less distinguished.
Immediately. Because, as the source material bluntly puts it, authority is delegatable, genius is not. Moses could no longer spare his personal attention, his genius, for every small project, and the system he'd built relied entirely on that personal oversight. There was no resilient structure underneath.
His own success created a fragility, a bottleneck, that only his constant direct involvement could mask.
Wow.
And we see echoes of that maybe in a different way in the corporate world, too, like with Leah Koch at Chrysler or the issues at IBM.
Yeah, slightly different flavors, but related themes. Iacocca was undeniably a brilliant crisis leader. The Chrysler turnaround was legendary, but
Couldn't let go.
he struggled mightily to leave center stage, postponed his retirement multiple times, held on to the perks and the power. The joke was that Iacocca stood for, I am chairman of Chrysler Corporation, always.
So his failure wasn't in the initial success, but in building something that could last beyond him.
Exactly. He didn't create an enduring great company. The system remained too dependent on his personality, his force of will. It lacked that deeper, resilient structure because he couldn't or wouldn't fully empower successors and step back. It's an ego trap, really.
And IBM, what was their issue, according to the sources?
IBM's problem seems to have been more about internal focus, almost navel-gazing. They got caught up in internal politics, endless pushback against decisions that had already been made years before. They just failed to execute.
And lost sight of the market.
Completely. Allowed market share to plummet while they were busy with internal turf wars or rehashing old arguments. The leadership lost focus on what actually matters, the external reality, the customer, delivering results because they were too consumed by the internal power dynamics, and, it seems, a culture that tolerated missing deadlines and failing to execute.
So whether it's Moses' inability to scale his genius, or Iacocca's struggle with ego, or IBM's internal paralysis, the lesson seems stark. A leader's personal brilliance can actually become the organization's biggest weakness if it leads to over-centralization and prevents the growth of resilient, distributed leadership capability throughout the system.
That's a perfect summary. The reliance on the single point of genius or control creates inherent fragility. Hashtag conclusion synthesis. Okay, so let's try to pull all these threads together. We've gone from Aristotle's pragmatic politics in ancient Greece
Right, through the Guido's call for inner purity.
to Enlightenment ideas about law, to Madison on factions, to Frengel on inner freedom.
And then modern military leadership, Pixar's creative culture, the pitfalls of Moses and Iacocca. It's a huge sweep.
It is, but when you synthesize it all, this deep dive across millennia and disciplines, I think a really consistent core lesson emerges, doesn't it?
It feels like it boils down to balance. Effective leadership, stable systems, whether political, spiritual, corporate, they all seem to depend on getting the balance right between the external structure
You know, Aristotle's moderation, Locke's clear laws, fair processes.
and the internal quality. The purified intention from the Gita, the self-mastery Covey talks about, the decentralized trust of the seals, the courageous candor needed at Pixar.
Exactly. Structure alone isn't enough if the people within it are corrupt or fearful. And internal virtue alone isn't enough if the external system is fundamentally unstable or unjust. You need both.
Which leads to what you call the great paradox, especially in our complex modern world.
Yeah, this constant human urge, particularly maybe in tech or security fields, to try and engineer the uncertainty and discomfort out of vulnerability. We want to build perfect, foolproof, robust systems to make us feel safe, control everything.
Eliminate risk.
Right. But what do the most effective systems we looked at actually do? The SEAL teams, Pixar's creative process,
Hmm.
they seem to do the opposite.
They embrace vulnerability.
In a calculated way, yes. They push for extreme information sharing, shared consciousness. They demand radical candor, which is inherently uncomfortable. They push decision-making down, which involves risk. True systemic strength, true protection, often seems to come not from locking everything down with centralized control.
But from empowering your people, fostering trust, and accepting that calculated risks and adaptability are necessary for resilience.
Precisely. It comes from empowered subordinates, operating within a clear framework of intent and values, not from a single genius trying to control every detail.
So leadership ultimately requires that constant self-awareness, that self-audit. Like that coaching question you mentioned, what's the real challenge here for you?
Yes. Forcing yourself as a leader to look beyond the surface problem, the easy answer, the external blame. If your first thought is always the market's tough, my team isn't skilled enough, competitors are unfair.
Then maybe that thought itself is the problem. You're locating the issue outside your circle of influence, refusing to see what you can change.
But B,
Yeah.
it forces you to ask, what's my role in this? What habit do I need to change? What method of influence isn't working? What commitment am I failing to keep? It brings it back to that internal work.
So the ultimate measure of a leader isn't necessarily their personal charisma or the power they accumulate or even the peak results they achieve in the short term.
Perhaps not. Maybe the truer measure is the sustainable effectiveness and the internal freedom they cultivate in the people and the systems they lead. Did they build something resilient?
Did they build a system that can absorb shocks, adapt, and continue to function well, even when their personal genius glance can no longer be spared, to use the Moses example?
Exactly. Did they build a self-correcting organism or just a bigger, more complex fortress that still relies entirely on them standing guard? Hashtag outro.
You know, reflecting on all this, from Madison trying to regulate factions based on property
Mm-hmm.
to Robert Moses finding his genius couldn't scale, it really does seem that the core difficulty, whether you're building a society or a company,
It often comes back to the same fundamental human flaw, doesn't it? The struggle of the person at the top, the ruler, the leader, the CEO, to subordinate their own particular will, their ego, their desire for control.
to the greater good, the common purpose, the long-term health of the whole system.
It seems to be a recurring theme throughout history and across all these different domains.
Which leaves us with a final, maybe quite challenging thought for everyone listening. It kind of merges that transcendental guidance from the Gita with the day-to-day reality of work and life.
Go on.
If the Gita suggests that the highest state, perfection, involves acting purely for the satisfaction of the whole system, without personal motivation for gain or glory, how much of our own daily decision-making, honestly, aligns with that?
Oof, that's a tough one.
How much is truly aimed at the supreme whole, whether that's your organization's mission, your family's well-being, your community's health, versus how much is driven by, our own immediate needs, our desire for recognition, our comfort, our personal survival or gratification?
It's asking for a deep audit of our intentions, isn't it? Are we doing our duty because it's the right thing for the whole, or are we doing it because of the promotion, the bonus, the fear of getting fired, the desire to look good?
It's a profound question to ponder. What's the real why behind our actions?
A question that might be essential for any kind of truly sustained success personally or organizationally.
Indeed. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time.